Amazon never meant that. You know how they said that they were going to list the cost of the tariffs on their price tags, how much more expensive their products were going to be because of the tariffs. They said that they were going to list that, list the markup on the price tags. That's what they said they were going to do. So, of course, immediately the Trump administration responded and accused Amazon of collaborating with China, working with China, and so on, being like an enemy. So immediately they took back what they said. They said they're not going to do it. But obviously, this was just a PR stunt from the beginning, so that they can inflate the prices as much as they want, and everybody will just chalk it up to the tariffs. Most likely, Amazon is going to probably get the tariffs paid anyway by subsidies or tax cuts, quantitative easing, or what have you. So they'll just increase the prices and have you think that it's all because of the tariffs and not because of greed. Even though your taxes are probably going to go to pay the tariffs on their behalf anyway. Like, if Amazon wanted to be transparent, why not include how much the price is, or how much of the price is a markup for executive salaries? Mark that down, put that down. What's the markup on all goods anyway? How much does it cost Amazon to buy what they're selling you as opposed to how much it costs you to buy it from Amazon? But they won't do that, obviously. They'll never do that. They're just going to price gouge, off of the manufactured shortages from the tariffs and the fabricated overhead costs of the tariffs. Look, I think you have to start actually trying to accept what's happening now in the United States. It's kind of remarkable to me, frankly, that anyone can't process what's happening now, that they can't recognize what's happening now. Your docks, your shipyards are empty. Cargo vessels are not bringing goods. Your shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be shortages. There's going to be job losses across multiple sectors, not just retail. Shipping, trucking, dock workers, construction, the energy sector, hospitals, schools, on and on. It's not a trade war. This is an economic war being waged by the A National OCGFC against the United States by means of the American government itself. And it's not covert by any stretch of the imagination. It's as blatant as it can be. As I've said before, this is a downsizing operation. And the trajectory is not hard to see, nor is the reasoning behind it. And it's not about Trump, like I said before. Trump was just given the task because he's the right one for the task. But the task was going to get assigned one way or the other to someone, and it was going to get executed one way or the other, because this is what has to happen. The paradigm is shifting. And if you're not aware of that, then once that paradigm has shifted, you will continue to operate in an obsolete paradigm, which is going to leave you completely helpless and completely vulnerable. Believe it or not, even though everyone thinks that I'm always expressing sort of gloom and doom about the United States, that's not accurate at all. Because believe it or not, I think that this can and should be a transformative and liberating moment, not only for the global South, but even for the people in the U.S., even for the people in the West. Because at moments of massive transition, moments of collapse, well, you have your best opportunity at those moments for establishing new ways of doing things, new approaches, new structures, new intellectual models, new societal models. Because things are in flux. Now more than any time in our lifetimes, the people, the population, can actually capture some influence, some sovereignty, some independence, and they can have some say. But you won't be able to do that if you convince yourself that what's happening is not really happening. If you convince yourself that you're just going through some normal cycle in politics, that's not what's going on. This period of history that we're living in right now, wallahi, I think this is going to be looked back upon in history as the beginning of the great reordering, the great decentralization. The language that everyone uses now is about multipolarity or polycentrism or what have you. But that's what we're talking about. Like I said before, that's what it all means. It means decentralization. This is going to be the theme of this era. And it's going to be manifested across sectors and at multiple levels. You should anticipate this, and you should plan accordingly, and you should act accordingly. The world is decentralizing. Countries are going to be decentralizing, particularly in the West. Do you see what I mean? The same way that you talk about a multipolar world, this is going to happen on the country level as well, in terms of the cohesion and the authority of the federal government, of national government. And then if you're in the U.S., if you're in America, for example, it's going to happen at the state level too. Every tier of the formal power structure is going to be decentralized to one degree or another. Or rather, it's going to be dismantled. It's going to be hollowed out. And what's going to make that deterioration and that hollowing out process, what's going to turn that into decentralization rather than just collapse, is going to be the emergence of alternative power structures, informal power structures, or private sector power structures, which is going to happen anyway. So basically, you're either going to have only corporate-led alternatives to state power, or you will have corporate-led alternatives to state power, and in addition to that, you will have people-led alternatives to state power. So you see what I mean about how this is an opportunity for truly transformative change. Now is your chance to actively participate in trying to create rules for how society is supposed to operate. I think that the United States is going to be undergoing a controlled collapse over at least the next decade or so. We're entering a decade of manufactured disorder. Tariffs, inflation, supply chain breakdowns, mass layoffs. None of this is accidental. It's the strategic culling of the middle class. It's the decoupling of state economies, and it's the delegitimization of government itself, except as enforcers. But even so-called law enforcement is going to be more and more privatized, most likely, militarized and privatized. The goal here is not to fix the system. The goal is to discredit the idea of national governance entirely and to make way for something else. That's the whole point, making way for something else. A corporate system that operates like a stateless regime, autonomous, automated, and above the law. Already you see it. You know, governments can't regulate big tech. They can't control currency flows and on and on and on. They can't even feed their own people without corporate intermediaries. So you're going to see corporations offering their own education, their own security, their own housing, you know, and even their own governance. Because the states are going to be bankrupt, financially and morally. I mean, think smart cities, 15-minute cities, and so on, you know, those gated communities. See, once private sector power has surpassed state power, then the OCGFC don't even need to rule over states anymore. They just need them out of the way. They need them to fail. They need it so that then they can fill the vacuum, you know. After about a decade or so of erosion, national institutions are going to collapse under the weight of debt, under the weight of division and dysfunction, and corporate cartels will step in, not openly, you know, not with armies. It'll be with apps, with contracts, with APIs. You know, we're talking about de facto power, not formal official power. Official power will still be duplicitously attributed to feckless government bodies, and you'll get to distract yourselves as a population with the charade of political activism, fighting over who's going to be in charge of these empty institutions. You know, you're going to go to a school that's funded by a conglomerate. You'll be treated in a hospital that's run by a hedge fund, and you'll pay for it for the rest of your life. You know, if you get sick, if you have an injury, if you need any sort of medical treatment at all, you're entering into debt slavery. These companies are going to be the de facto governments without any voting, without any representation, without any accountability. No accountability, just terms of service. By 2045, citizenship is basically going to be a subscription service, probably sooner. But this model isn't sustainable because human beings are not assets. They're not just data sets. They're not just markets. They're souls. And the soul rebels against this kind of thing. That's why you need to start now, working towards community sovereignty in your own communities. Not the nationalistic kind, not flag waving, but values-based, spiritually anchored. Create locally embedded systems of local governance, local trade, you know? Because when the system collapses, people are not going to need just food and water. They're going to need a whole framework. They're going to need a whole framework, a way to understand the world in the wake of this collapse. They're going to need a moral compass. They're going to need a functional economic model and a system of legitimate authority at a local level. You need to build an alternative civilization is what I'm saying. Not just as a theory, but as a practice. You know, I shouldn't say alternative civilization because you don't have a civilization now, to be honest. So I'm saying that you need to use this transitional period, this period of collapse, to actually finally build a civilization from the ground up. Resource sovereignty on a community level, communities that control their own food, their own water, their own energy through collective cooperation. Economic decentralization, abolish this rentier capitalism. Introduce value-backed or labor-backed local currencies. Believe me, you can do this. Contributive labor systems. Now is the time to try to use your imagination. You need moral governance. Whether you like it or not, you need decision-making based on accountability to the creator and responsibility to the creation. I don't care if you're atheist or not. I don't care what your belief may or may not be. But you're not going to get anywhere by basing decision-making on arbitrary, capricious, ad hoc morality. That's what you've been doing, and it's gotten you where you are now. And you need transnational solidarity, collecting like-minded communities across borders, not so that you can form a state, but so that you can form an order. You know, you need to start brainstorming new models. The OCGFC operate with transnational solidarity. They built a system of order without borders. You should too. I've said it before. This is not utopian. This is strategic inevitability, if you're serious. Because when the OCGFC fails to deliver dignity, and they will, when governments fail to deliver survival, which they will fail, then the world is going to turn to those who can provide meaning and who can provide function and can provide both of these in tandem. And if that's not going to be you, it's going to be Jeff Bezos. It's going to be Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Larry Fink. Please understand, you're not powerless in this situation. You don't have to just be spectators. You can be the early builders of the next era. The OCGFC have a plan, so should we have a plan. The question isn't if the system is going to collapse. That's already underway. The question is what is going to rise in its place. So you should try to make sure that it is something that is worthy of the human soul. Obviously, the first thing that you're going to have to do is get beyond the twin lies that you've been told all your life, the twin lies that act as the major blinders to your vision in terms of being able to think about other ways of doing things. Of course, I'm talking about the twin lies of democracy and capitalism. The lie that America even practices either one because it doesn't, and it never has. And in fact, nobody does, truth be told, and nobody ever has. So you invested so much alleged virtue in those two words that now you have to pretend that that's what you practice over there, you know, and you have to reject anything that doesn't go by those words, democracy and capitalism. But again, the fact of the matter is that the thing that those names supposedly means does not exist and never did, not in your country and not anywhere else. No theoretical model of government actually exists in real life. There's no virtue in a theoretical form of government that doesn't exist in real life. And there's no virtue in an economic system or a theory of economic management that doesn't exist in the real world, in real life. Every government, every power structure, every state is just pragmatic. That's all. There's no fancy word for that. There's no noble sounding, decorative term for how states actually operate in the real world. It's just the necessities of power, and those necessities are determined by culture, by morality, and by the priorities of that culture, and in accordance with the prevailing morality of that culture. In other words, power is going to act however it acts because of the instincts and the value system of any given society. And in the West, in Western society, that has always meant that the priority of power is consolidation, accumulation of power, wealth, and resources, and the suppression of anything and anyone that challenges that. That's the Western priority system. But every state, every power structure is the same insofar as it actually only adheres to pragmatism, not to any pristine theoretical model of governance. That's just the name that they put on what they do. Because obviously you don't have democracy in the United States. You don't have democracy and you don't have capitalism either. I hate to tell you. So actually there's no real reason why you should cling to these words or pretend to cling to these words when you don't actually practice them as it is. And you never did. You see what I mean? They've got you so invested in thinking that these two things, these two systems, this political system and this economic system, are the best systems in the world, that you'll reject anything that doesn't have that label on it. Meanwhile, you don't actually have that system in your own society in real life. You're not a democracy and you're not capitalist. No, the United States is not what it claims to be. It's not the land of liberty. It's not the beacon of democracy. It's not the heartland of capitalism. America is just the nucleus of an engineered illusion. It's a global advertisement for a system that does not exist in practice, only in narrative. Only in narrative. And that narrative has only ever been used just to hold you back and to hold you down. To hold you down from ever pursuing any real change or improvement. And they limit you always in this simplistic, oppositional, binary thinking all the time about everything. Either democracy or tyranny, capitalism or communism, Republican or Democrat, black or white, for us or against us, win or lose, zero sum, on and on. Your minds are trained like this to stifle you from engaging with complexity. Why? Because the world is complex. And they don't want you to navigate the world outside of their instructions, outside of their guidance, outside of their framework. You know, capitalism and communism or socialism or Marxism or whatever. They make you think that these are the only options, that the only options that you have are Western models, theoretical models that are on the table, you know? And just like that, what they think about black and white in the United States, you got the one drop rule, you know? So one drop of socialism means it is socialism. Meanwhile, corporations are welfare queens. Your democracy is an oligarchy. But as long as you can put that democratic label on it, then you get to pretend that your system that bears no resemblance to a democracy is a democracy, you know? And as long as you've got 50 different types of toothpaste at the grocery store, then you have capitalism. And you stay invested in these falsely labeled systems, you know? Okay, you hold elections, you have your flags, you have your televised debates. That's not a democracy. That's choreography. You know, twice in the last generation, the person who won the presidency in America was actually rejected by the popular vote. Why? Well, everyone knows why. Because of the Electoral College, which is nothing but a relic designed to protect the slave states. And every election, every presidential election, they have to explain to you again why maintaining the Electoral College somehow makes sense. And somehow it doesn't actually subvert democracy, and it's a good idea. And it's all just confusing enough to make you feel ignorant whenever it's talked about. And then you just stop bringing it up if your candidate happens to be the one who's appointed. And in America, you've got the gerrymandering with the districts and such. That's not a bug. That's a feature of the system. Districts are redrawn not to represent people, to protect power. It's not governance. That's electoral fraud through legal paperwork, and everybody knows it. You're blocking people out of the system. I mean, millions of citizens are blocked from voting through voter ID laws, felony disenfranchisement, purges of the voter rolls. These aren't safeguards. These are all filters designed to maintain the demographic status quo of control. And you and I both know it. You got states with tiny populations that have the same representation as states with tens of millions of people. That's not democracy. That's like a veto by geography. And then you have obviously the Citizens United decision that turned money into speech. So the billionaires and corporations now speak a louder voice than millions of people. They write the laws and they tell the politicians what to pass of those laws. This isn't a secret. What democracy? You know, you're given two options. Both of those two options are funded by the same interests. This isn't a choice. It's a political cartel. What democracy? You know, you've got lifetime judges who were appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote. They overturn laws that the public supports, and they set court-made laws that the public opposes. What democracy? And all your politicians engage in insider trading with no consequences. You know, you pay for their crimes and they get reelected. You claim to be a capitalist society, but capitalism requires free markets, actually free markets, you know, which includes risk and competition. None of that exists in America. What exists is corporatism, collusion between the state and private power to rig economic outcomes and to protect the elite and to impoverish everyone else. Billions of subsidies go to corporations, banks, oil companies, you know, agribusiness. They get public money, subsidies, and so on. While public schools and clinics go into decay. You know, all your biggest companies are insulated from risk, too big to fail. So they can be irresponsible, they can be negligent, they can make terrible decisions, and it's fine. Taxpayers are going to cover their losses. That's fine. That's not capitalism. No one covers the losses for small businesses. The market punishes the poor and rescues the rich. That's how you work. The Federal Reserve, which is a private institution, by the way, dictates artificial interest rates, printing money. You know, you need a license to braid hair in America. You put up all of these barriers to block the lower class from even being able to enter the economy. And you create these patent monopolies. IP laws don't protect creativity. They protect control. You know, keeping medicine, software, all sorts of knowledge locked behind paywalls. That's anti-competition. It's anti-innovation. That's not capitalism. This is not capitalism. It's state-managed cronyism. Not to mention the military-industrial complex. They don't compete. They have no bid contracts. Your system is a system of privatizing the gains, but socializing the losses. Profits are private, losses are public. You pay, they profit every time. You have socialism for the rich, but you have market rules for the poor. And the tax code is a labyrinth of loopholes. You know, Amazon pays zero, you pay everything. and you have no say in where your tax money is spent, how it's spent, that's not taxation, that's tribute. Small businesses drown in compliance regulations, but the large businesses write the rules in the first place, and they get to bypass them. They tell you that that's all capitalism, and they tell you that capitalism is good, and you're supposed to be happy with that. But you have to understand this. Democracy and capitalism in the United States are just labels that they put on their system, which is actually only about total power consolidation. These labels are just tools of containment. It's a dual lock mechanism that maintains elite supremacy while convincing the masses that they're free. These are two eye patches that they put on your eyes. It's not a democratic republic. It's not capitalism. It's a corporate oligarchy with theatrical rituals to make it appear legitimate. You should stop looking at the United States for any sort of a model. Even the model that they claim to follow and that they say everyone else that they want everyone else to follow, they don't follow. Their economy is a facade. It's a facade. Its politics are performance. And its institutions are designed not to empower, but to pacify people. And like I said, they keep you locked down with these labels, democracy, capitalism, and so on. These so-called political and economic models, even when they don't exist in the real world. Also that you will never pursue alternatives. They sacralized the words democracy and capitalism, and they told you that that's what you have, so you have to be happy with that. So if you start trying to build alternatives, then it's basically sacrilege. Yes, I said build alternatives. I didn't say look for alternatives from the existing political and economic models that are out there, because none of them exist in the real world, just in theory. Like I said, every country is a pragmatic hybrid, doing what they need to do to manage their societies according to the priorities that are dictated by their cultures and by their morality. There's no name for that. There's no label for that, and there doesn't have to be. But look, like I said, your society is heading for the rocks. And you have every right, and in fact, you have every responsibility to try to save yourselves and to try to save your families and to try to save your community as best you can. You don't owe anything to the people who steered that ship into the rocks. And you'd be a fool to trust them or to think that they have your best interests in mind. No, you need to start building alternatives just so that you can survive and your families can survive. But you need to take those eye patches off. You need to look at the world with open eyes. I mean, let me speak plainly. What's unfolding in the United States, you really need to understand this. This is not a passing phase. This is not a dip in the cycle. This is a structural transformation taking place, and it's not in your favor. The conditions that you're heading into, and which in many ways you're already inside of, the conditions that you're heading into are not the product of incompetence. They're the result of deliberate, systemic design, engineered scarcity, institutionalized theft, the planned obsolescence of the middle class. And it's really crucial for you to get the idea out of your head that incompetence has anything to do with it. Because if you don't get it out of your head, then you're going to keep holding on to the false hope that some politician is going to come along and get you out of this mess. You're going to keep thinking that, maybe if you just vote differently, things might change. No, you need to understand you are being deliberately, calculatedly, and willfully put down. And it's bipartisan and it's unanimous that this is going to be your future. Prices are rising, food, rent, fuel, electricity, not randomly, not accidentally. This is not hyperinflation. This is slow suffocation. It's the erosion of your purchasing power. You might see an extra dollar on your paycheck if they do a wage rise, but it's not going to buy what it could have bought you last year. There's not progress. There's bait and switch. Your standard of living is not going to be able to be maintained except by working longer hours, taking side hustles, cutting back on family time, free time, and so on. That's the New Deal. This is not a recession. This is a regime. Wages are not going to catch up, not because they can't catch up, but because the labor market is being redesigned. The expansion of gig work, temporary contracts. This isn't a consequence of hard times. This is the consequence of a new model that's being pushed. A system of job insecurity is being normalized. Benefits are a new luxury. Full-time employment is a relic of the past. Please understand what's happening to you. Banks are not just being cautious about lending. They're weaponizing credit. You're being turned into vehicles for intergenerational debt. Car payments, mortgages, even credit cards. All of this is going to be used punitively. Defaults are going to rise. Bankruptcies will climb. Home ownership is going to become nothing but a fantasy. This is not a failure of the system. This is the system. There's no policy solution because the policy makers serve the architects of your distress. This is how it's going to be from here on out. Understand? Stress is going to be your constant companion. Anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, all of this is going to rise. But mental health services are going to recede behind paywalls. Crime is going to rise, not because of moral decline, not because people are getting worse, but because they're getting more and more cornered. Your neighborhood is going to become more dangerous, not because people are getting worse, but because making your neighborhood more dangerous is what the system is programmed to happen. Childcare, education, healthcare, these are going to become financial death sentences. You're going to have to choose between wellness and rent, between school books and groceries. You're probably already having to make those choices. This is what collapse looks like. Social bonds, community is going to fray. Local businesses are going to shut down. There's going to be fewer and fewer social activities. Time with family, time with friends is going to disappear. And you're going to retreat inward unless you resist that consciously and strategically. Because survival is going to require you rehumanizing daily life intentionally, because they're trying to dehumanize it. Everyone who has assets, significant assets, real estate, stocks, precious metals, political connections, obviously they're going to be fine. They're going to thrive. They're going to buy up more land. They're going to buy up more homes. They're going to buy up more businesses. Because your hardship is their opportunity. That's the system that your culture created. That's the system that your culture created. You're going to see the rise of extremism, far right, far left, religious cults, separatist movements, racist movements, fueled by the rage and the pain and the deepening distrust that everyone in the society has towards the institutions that are supposed to be serving them. And that distrust is justified. So what are people going to do? Well, they're going to move. More and more people are going to move out of the cities to cheaper regions, into the rural areas, if they're smart. They're going to try to close off as much of their debts as they can, downsize their lives. You know, a lot of people who are living on the street today are only living in the street because they tried to maintain a standard of living that they couldn't maintain, rather than downsize. They refused to downgrade their lives. So instead of downgrading their standard of living, they got evicted. You have to make hard choices, and you have to make them fast. This is like the opposite of the fear of missing out, FOMO. This is the desperate hope that somehow you're going to be able to dodge all of the bullets that are being fired at you from every side by the economy where you can't. Once you realize that this model doesn't work for you and that it was never meant to work for you, then you can start unplugging from it. And you can start trying to construct something new. You know, try to invest in what they can't take, your skills, your relationships, your community. Don't just prepare for scarcity, prepare for sovereignty. Because the reality is that you do not need a new financial model. You do not need a new political model or economic model. You need a new civilizational model. You need a strategy for dignity in a world that is collapsing under engineered disorder. You need grounded resistance that's ethical, intelligent, and collective. That's what I'm talking about. You cannot have a political or economic revolution without first having a cultural revolution. I mean, let me put it simply. The situation you're heading towards, your money is not going to stretch very far. Your workload is going to increase. Your access to basic goods is going to decline. By 2030, I would think that your purchasing power is probably going to decline by at least 10 to 15%. You should look for whole cities and whole states to go bankrupt with increasing frequency, fiscal crises, all while the government is going to deny that you're even in a recession. They're probably going to claim that you're in a recovery. They'll probably even try to tell you that it's the best economy ever. The economy is booming. But I wouldn't be surprised if by 2030, it's going to take 30 to 40% of your income just to buy groceries. If food banks were listed on the stock exchange, that would be the best investment you could make right now, because they're going to be booming. Just like Starbucks was in the early 2000s. The new franchise opportunity, food banks. So aside from the obvious immediate steps that individuals should take, like trying to get rid of your debt, stop using your credit cards, cancel your subscriptions, try to put at least a couple of $1,000s in cash aside for emergencies, and try to shift as much cash as you can out of your savings account and try to hold it in a mix of, cash, silver, gold, so on, commodities. Try to buy as much durable goods as you can right now. You need to start right now trying to plant the seeds for longer term solutions. And as soon as you start brainstorming about alternatives for economic survival, for long-term solutions, you're going to immediately see how important community is. You're going to understand then exactly why your power structure has always engineered your atomization and your isolation. Why they want you to not know your neighbors. Why they want everyone to be glued to their phones. Why they want you to be antisocial. They want you to be rude and selfish and obnoxious. You know, why they groom every man to act like a tough guy. Why they groom every woman to be catty. You know, why they want every person to basically stay triggered 24/7. Because if you're going to survive, you're going to have to survive as a community. You're going to have to actually get along with people. You can't be combative and argumentative and petty and confrontational, spiteful, paranoid, you know, the way you people are. You have to build community. You have to actually try to get along with people. You could create contributive ecosystems in your communities rather than competitive markets, rather than dog eat dog. You know, shift from a consumer to producer role by encouraging your community to form small interlinked collectives based on locality, where each member contributes labor, skills, or goods in return for mutual access to necessities, food, goods, and so on, education, services, you know, not for individual profit, but for collective self-sufficiency, actual cooperation. You can organize neighborhood syndicates, you know, that collectively import essential items from non-tariff countries or that even directly produce goods with 3D printers and so forth, community-run cooperatives and so on. I'm telling you, you need to think about the fact that state governance, federal governments is going to disintegrate. It's disintegrating now. The state's only function is going to be to police you, not to provide for you, not to protect you. So if you have any sense at all, then you're going to need to start looking at the state as an occupation force that you have to do your best to try to circumvent, to try to navigate your way around. Because their job is going to be literally to disenfranchise you, dispossess you, disempower you, impoverish, and subjugate you. Mark my words. I'm not being hyperbolic. That's what's going to happen. So you need to put it in your mind that your community is like a people living under occupation. I'm completely serious about this. And you're going to have to do all that you can to try to create your own system of order locally, your own system of management, your own system of survival, independent of the state, independent of the system. And yes, that means creating your own culture locally, a healthy culture, so that the localized system that you build will have humane, healthy, and moral priorities, unlike the state. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen immediately, even though we can already see that it is underway in America and in the West generally. But you're moving towards a total system collapse. And I'm not talking about some post-apocalyptic scenario. No, this isn't a zombie movie. But if you want to compare what life was like in the year 2000 with what it's like in 2025, and then you compare what 2045 is going to be like compared to today, it's going to be a dramatic and very grim contrast. But you see, they do it in slow motion. They do it incrementally so that it becomes normalized. But that's why I'm saying you need to start now. You need to start building now. Actually participate in your own survival. Listen, the whole underpinnings of Western so-called civilization are flawed and they're toxic. That's why it built the systems that it built. The scarcity model of economics, the extractive, exploitative mentality. That whole mindset is hostile. You need to transcend that. Like even with money, like I said, you can actually create collective mutual support networks within your community, and you can decide for yourselves how you're going to mediate exchange of goods and services yourselves. You don't have to take their model. You don't have to take their approaches as a given. You could establish credit systems internal to your communities. You know, develop some sort of a value-backed type of a currency or a labor-backed currency, digital or paper-based. You know, it's like an alternative currency that's issued locally, redeemable in goods and services from participating members, but pegged to effort or contribution, not to fiat. You know, create a registry where hours of work across all different fields are valued in units and stored in personal ledgers, allowing for trade even if money gets devalued. You know, redemption via purpose. These credits can be redeemed not just for goods, but for educational access, services, and so forth, linking economy to social agency. These kinds of projects exist in New York, in Switzerland, and other places where you have local currencies that are pegged to service hours and contribution. I mean, imagine if you could actually secure your basic needs through an alternative local currency, credit for work or credit for service, and you could redeem that at participating stores, participating vendors, and service providers instead of using dollars from your job. Well, you could actually start saving money, saving dollars, if you could actually secure your needs through an alternative form of exchange. Like I said, these types of things do exist, and you can learn from those existing initiatives. It's not undoable. But let me tell you something, it's going to be difficult for many people to accept. The collapse of the United States, economically, socially, and morally, was not caused by an external enemy. It's not the fault of China. It's not the fault of immigrants. It's not the fault of elections that didn't go your way. It's not even the fault of just corrupt elites. No, the collapse was philosophical. It was spiritual. It was civilizational. The rot began at the root. They built a civilization where the highest value was materialism, where worth was measured in consumption, where success meant accumulation, where GDP growth was more important than human dignity or societal well-being. They mistook endless accumulation for life's purpose, and in so doing, they starved their own souls of meaning. I mean, that would have been enough to lead them astray, but it didn't stop there. They championed individualism to the point of pathology, glorifying personal ambition and disdaining collective responsibility. Their economy wasn't designed to sustain, it was designed to extract. It's a culture focused exclusively on short-termism, the addiction to quarterly profits, election cycles, 24-hour news, the inability to think past next week, let alone the next generation, and everybody has to kiss the ring of the invisible hand of the market. So in the end, this civilization didn't fall because it was attacked. It fell because it forgot what civilization even means, what it's supposed to mean. It forgot what it means to be human. So if there's any path to reconstruction, it has to begin by recentering human life around meaning, not around materialism. Balancing individual initiative against communal obligation. Building economies that are based on reciprocity, not robbery. Institutionalize long-term thinking. Try to constrain the market within the boundaries of morality. I mean, why on earth would you have ever accepted it to be otherwise? And yes, I said reconstruction, not reform, not rescue, not restoration. The system that you built cannot and should not be saved. You don't need to try to save it. You need to try to save yourselves from it. You need to jumpstart yourselves out of the habit of passivity. Like I said, I get accused of engaging in doom and gloom. But that's because you've gotten so habituated to helplessness. Yes, you're going to have to face severe economic hardship. But okay, frame economic turmoil not as the end, but as the end of a broken system, the delegitimization of a broken system. A way to trigger, inshallah, a cultural shift from consumption to meaning, from job-based identity to a character-based identity. You need to start trying to think of yourself, your community, as a small, non-aligned state that's navigating regional instability. Think like that, behave like that, plan like that, because that is essentially what your communities are, what they're going to be. You need to engage in a kind of micro-diplomacy locally with foreign diaspora communities, with immigrant communities who maintain ties to non-U.S. trade networks, especially BRICS-aligned countries. And maybe you can get access to alternative supply chains, informal commerce for your communities and neighborhoods, because you need to build self-sufficiency. The aim here is not to try to survive the collapse in a state of desperation and regress into self-isolation. You need to build resilience. You need to build systems that are ethical, that are collective, that are non-corporate, and that are ultimately liberatory. Moving forward, it's going to be very important for you to remember that collapse is not catastrophe. It's clarification. The deeply flawed and, in fact, corrupt architecture of the Western system has been exposed. And without that exposure, no one would have been forced to ever recognize how profoundly you need to change. Americans looking at empty shelves at the grocery store is going to be like man looking at the abyss. As long as those shelves are full, then you'll never see how empty your so-called civilization is and how empty it has made you. No, you need a whole cultural, psychological, and civilizational realignment. That's why I said no Western theories are going to be able to provide a remedy for you. You know, your so-called leftists, they'll say that wealth redistribution will solve all the problems. But that doesn't alter the fundamental structure that led to the disparities in the first place. Nah, the leftists, the Marxists, and so on, they're just as much about money and materialism as the capitalists are. Redistribution without structural correction is just a management strategy for continuing the injustice and the oppression. You know, for the West, the only framework that you have is either private property or communal ownership. You know, capitalism, communism. Either private property or state ownership. Private property, yes or no. That same old binary thinking, you know. You don't have a concept that understands our relationship to wealth, our relationship to property, as one of stewardship and custodianship, or as a conduit. It's about circulation, not accumulation. Wealth isn't something to brag about. It's something that you will be asked about, what you did with it and what you did to get it. But you can't get past the having it part, you know. You need to get past that. But the whole system that you have has put you in such a desperate situation that you can't get past that. And see, they've got you feeling obliged to these systems that don't fulfill any obligations to you. They have you feeling obliged to it, so that you think that if you abandon those systems, you abandon those theories, you abandon those labels like democracy, capitalism, so on, you think it's some kind of betrayal or some sort of a rebellion. Because again, you have that combative mindset, you know, the with us or against us mentality, even though the us in that framing is actually against you too. No, realignment is not rebellion, it's recovery. It's a recovery from all of the damage that your so-called civilization has done to you and all the damage that is done to everyone else in the world. I mean, I know the transformation is going to be hard. You're literally going to have to start from zero. But it has been so wrong for so long that just getting back to zero is actually progress. Because what I'm talking about, the type of changes that I'm talking about, the type of changes that you need to make, what I'm talking about is for you to actually return to the way that healthy societies always used to function before those Western predatory, parasitic, materialistic pathologies took over and drained all meaning from your life. That's why I say realignment, because you're disaligned now. You're dislocated, you're disjointed, you're dysfunctional, and you're broken. And you need to get back into alignment with what it means to be a human being.